Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really diving into this fascinating book called Building a Better Marriage. But, don't worry, you don't have to be married or even thinking about it to get something out of this. Really, it's about way more than just rings and vows. It's about, how understanding ourselves better, even our like shadow sides, can actually make our bonds stronger with other people.
Yeah, definitely. This book really dives into these like universal themes,
Yeah.
self-awareness, communication, and like how hard it is to build these relationships that last, especially in a world that sometimes feels like it's working against that.
Totally. And to really like pull you in, the author starts with this really stark contrast. They talk about seeing all these news stories, full of violence and tragedy, marriages just falling apart. But then they flip it and describe coming home to their own family after like a long day of counseling couples. It's like, how can love and like all that darkness exist at the same time?
Yeah, it really makes you think. And I think what makes this book so interesting is that the author isn't just coming at it as an expert. They're talking about their own marriage, their own struggles with ego, and like being vulnerable like that makes it so much easier to connect with.
100%. Like, it's refreshing to hear, especially from an expert. It reminds you that we're all just human figuring this stuff out. And speaking of figuring things out, one of the first things that really hit me was this idea about the difference between knowledge, understanding, and wisdom.
Oh, yeah. The author says knowing like the what, it's not enough. You have to understand the why and then be able to actually use that knowledge. That's the wisdom part. The
Yeah.
how and the when. Like, it's like knowing that tomato's a fruit, right? But you don't put tomato in a fruit salad.
I love
You
that.
need to know and you need the wisdom to apply it the right way.
That is such a good analogy. And it's so true for marriage, for any relationship, really. It's not enough to just know the rules of communication or how to resolve conflict. You got to get why those things matter and how to actually use them in a way that works for you and, whoever you're with.
Exactly. And that's where this whole enemy within thing comes in. The author says that a lot of times the biggest threat to a marriage, it's not from outside. It's from us, our own egos. It's about like realizing how our pride, selfishness, insecurities, all that stuff,
Yeah.
it can sabotage our relationships even when we're trying to be good partners.
Yeah, that's a tough one to admit. It's so easy to blame other stuff when things go wrong, or even blame our partners, right? But what if it's us? Have you ever felt that, like, internal struggle between ego and love in your own relationships?
Oh, for sure. We all deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's why the author is so big on this idea of conscious living. It's about making choices on purpose, especially in relationships. So like instead of just reacting or doing the same old things, we can choose to respond in ways that actually help our relationship.
So instead of like snapping at your partner after a bad day, conscious living would be like taking a second to breathe and then actually explaining what's wrong, being present, thinking about how what we do affects other people.
Exactly. It's about seeing those patterns we have that mess things up and then choosing to do something different, something that builds each other up. And one of the best ways to do that, the author says, is through this metaphor of a garden.
Okay, the garden analogy. I've got to say, this one really clicked for me. So tell me more about how the author uses this to talk about marriage.
So they say marriage is like this, living, breathing thing that needs attention and care all the time.
Hmm.
Just like a garden, you reap what you sow. If you put in the time, the effort, the love, that's what your relationship will be. But if you don't,
It's not going to magically thrive on its own.
exactly.
So it's not about finding some perfect garden to just walk into. It's about being a better gardener, putting in the work. And that makes this whole idea of working on a relationship feel a lot less daunting. It's more like, well, a labor of love.
That's a good way to put it. It really is. And you know what else with that? The author actually brings this analogy to life with some of the stories about couples they've worked with. Like there's this one about a couple who are struggling with intimacy.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was really interested in that part. Like, how do they take these kind of big ideas and make them work for something as personal as intimacy?
Right. Okay, so this couple had been married for years and things had just fizzled. They were stuck in this rut of resentment and blame. Like each person felt like the other wasn't trying.
Ugh, it's so easy to let those bad vibes build up, especially when life gets crazy and you forget to, like, nurture the connection.
For sure. And the author realized that a lot of times it wasn't that they didn't love each other anymore. It was that they weren't putting in the effort to actually show it. So
Hmm.
they gave this couple a challenge to change how they thought about intimacy. Instead of it just being physical, they had to see it as this expression of love, gratitude, connection.
That's kind of beautiful, actually. It's less about the act itself and more about the feeling behind it.
You got it. And to put this into practice, The author gave them this exercise. For a whole week, they had to focus on doing these little things for each other, little acts of love and appreciation,
Like what? Give me an example.
like making coffee for each other in the morning, or leaving a cute little note, or even just saying thank you more.
Just those little reminders, right? Like the things we forget to do when we're busy. So did it work? Did it help them?
It did. They said they felt closer than they had in years, and that emotional closeness actually led to a better physical connection too, which just goes to show that sometimes it's not about the big gestures, it's the little things you do consistently. Those are the things that make a difference.
It's like they say, the little things are the big things. And that's true for everything in a relationship, right? Not just intimacy.
100%. It's about those everyday moments, the way we choose to treat our partner,
Yeah.
showing them that we care.
Hmm.
It all comes back to that garden analogy.
Hmm.
You have to be willing to put in the work every day if you want to see those beautiful flowers bloom.
And it's like, just like a gardener has to protect their plants from bugs and stuff, we have to watch out for the things that can hurt our relationships, like negativity, resentment, taking each other for granted, all those things.
Totally. Those are the weeds in the garden. And if you let those grow out of control, they can really choke the love and connection right out of your relationship. The author talks about how important it is to deal with those things right away before they become huge problems.
So much easier to pull a weed when it's small than to wait till it's like taken over the whole garden. Speaking of, deep roots, the author also talks about forgiveness, don't they?
Yes, forgiveness is like the ultimate gardening move in your relationship. And it's not about saying what happened was okay. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment you're holding on to. It's a gift you give yourself as much as the other person.
I mean, that can be really hard, especially when someone's broken your trust. But holding on to grudges, it just hurts you more in the end.
It does. It's a heavy weight to carry around. It drags us down and keeps us from moving on, both as individuals and as a couple.
This has been such a good conversation. And it really makes you think about how building a better marriage, or really any strong relationship, takes effort and understanding. And you have to be willing to grow both together and on your own. It really is a journey. And it's interesting. I mean, this book really changes how you think about the work part of a relationship. It's not about like keeping score or feeling like it's a chore. It's more about actively choosing to be present, to nurture that connection with your partner. And speaking of choices, one thing I thought was really powerful was how much the author talked about aligning our actions with our values.
Yes, that is so important. The author says that when what we do doesn't match up with what we say we believe, that creates conflict inside of us. And that can mess with everything, especially our relationships.
Oh, totally.
It's like trying to jam two puzzle pieces together when they don't actually fit.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like, let's say you're always telling your partner that you value honesty, but then you keep catching yourself telling these little white lies. Those don't match up, right? And that's going to create tension, break down trust. So how do we actually make sure our actions and our values are like on the same page, especially in a marriage or a really long-term relationship?
Well, you got to start by figuring out what your values actually are. What are your non-negotiables? Is it honesty, integrity, kindness, growth, adventure? Once you really know what matters most to you, that's when you can start making choices that actually reflect those values.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
100%. And that includes how we treat our partners. Like, are we treating them with the same respect, kindness, honesty that we want from them? Are we making choices that help them grow?
Right, because it's not just about us. It's about us. So it's not just about my needs. It's thinking about how my actions are going to affect the relationship.
Exactly. And this all ties into something else the author talks about, shared goals, shared dreams. Because when you and your partner have a shared vision for the future, like traveling the world or starting a family or just growing old together, that can be a really powerful thing. It brings you closer.
Yeah. It's about building a life together that you're both stoked about, a life that feels meaningful, And it doesn't have to be these big, crazy adventures. It can be smaller stuff, too.
Absolutely. Trying that new restaurant downtown.
Yeah.
Or going for walks in nature. Or even just being lazy on the couch and watching a movie together. It's all about those little moments of connection that remind you why you're together in the first place.
And remembering to make time for those moments, to choose each other, even when things get hectic. And it all comes back to being intentional, to choosing to build love and connection every single day.
Wow, we have covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's really made me think differently about what it means to build a strong relationship, one that lasts. Me too. This book is like a reminder that relationships take work, but it's so worth it. When we approach our relationships with intention, with humility, with a willingness to grow, we create the foundation for love and happiness that can last a lifetime.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of building a better marriage. And remember, no matter where you're at in your own life, whether you're single, dating, married, whatever, the stuff we talked about today can help you build stronger, more fulfilling relationships in all parts of your life.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn, to explore, so keep those conversations going.
And until next time, keep those brains engaged and those connections strong.